Secret of the Mimic told us quite a bit about Freddy's fractured past, and one of the most both surprising and unsurprising findings was that Fazbear Entertainment, the world's worst company, has been pulling their shtick since the 70s. Such as in the disastrous case of their deal with and brutal takeover of Murray's Costume Manor, a successful costume and mascot manufacturing company run by Edwin Murray and his late wife. Striking a deal with Fazzies turned out to be a huge mistake as it led to the company's shady practices bleeding into the business until they took over. And after so long of having Fazbear Entertainment's management be a nameless, faceless creature with poor morals, we finally have initials of one of the bigwigs who was calling the shots, being one to make offers and demands of Edwin, and those initials are W.A. William Afton? This just got interesting. And it gets a lot more interesting when we uncover not the secret of the Mimic, but the secret of the corporate espionage that led to the Freddys of today through lying, stealing, death and destruction, and numerous human health violations of all kinds. And by the end of this video, you'll see how Afton was behind it all. From destroying the company to destroying Edwin Murray's life, to even stealing his house. He literally stole Edwin's house. And I don't mean the popular current Edwin's house as a Fnaf 4 house theory. I mean the log where William strong-arms Edwin by revealing that Fazbear Entertainment owns said land and technically the house due to him defuncting on their deal. A deal that, as we will uncover, William purposefully sabotaged. He took this man for everything he had, and it's a crazy story. So let's begin at the beginning. So it's unclear when, well, many of the dates are pretty open, but at some point Edwin met up with William Afton and Henry Emily and made an agreement to work with Fazbear Entertainment on a new project. A huge project. Unlike other cases where Edwin was simply to make a mascot, this involved creating Springlock suits, animatronics, and even making a large proof-of-concept pizzeria in the research and development department under the factory. This was going to take a lot of time and cost a lot of money, but it was also the lifeline Edwin's company needed. But Edwin wasn't just a subcontractor. He was a friend, or at least he thought so. This can be seen in how he refers to Henry as Hen, and how distraught he is when they seemingly turn their backs on him.
What the hell was that? They treat me like some contractor to crack a whip at. Oh, Fiona was right. They don't think of me as a friend anymore. This is the last project I ever do for them.
And it turns out he had right to be paranoid because little did he know William was up to his mischief again. Starting with the contract. Edwin was either not aware of this or didn't pay much attention, seeing as these were his trusted business partners, but the contract with Fazbear Entertainment offered a sizable payment, but the price was that if the contract fell through, they weren't just going to get their money back. They were taking everything. His entire factory, everything he owned, all of his land, everything would then go right into Faz Inc.'s hands. From how William words it later in his message, I'm going to assume that he was the main spearhead of this happening, if not the head honcho himself. This made their agreement incredibly risky, especially if anything went wrong or changed during production, which both did. Now, I'm not entirely sure of the timeline here, but at some point as well, Edwin's wife Fiona, who was very involved with the company, passed away at Fall Fest, implied to have been a fire. This wasn't just a huge hit to Edwin, but to the company itself, as Fiona was the driving force behind keeping Edwin on track and smoothing things down between him and the workers. With her gone, the factory was already stepping out on the thin ice without skates. Desperate to bring her back, Edwin ended up building a mimic machine, F10-N4, to replace her, to replicate her. F10-N4, also known as Fiona, returned to being Edwin's right hand, helping him with the business and so on. He even made her a body so that she could help tend to David, their son. Alas, David passed away in a tragic, unexplained accident, and led to Edwin's further spiraling. Now, there is no evidence that William was connected to either of these deaths, But he's got a very, very long body count, and from the focus on Fall Fest in some of the games, beyond just being about Fiona, yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if Will was somehow involved in both of these tragedies. The more important part was that Edwin was mentally fragile at this point. Work was behind, debts were starting to stack up, his family was gone and not there to guide him or help him, and things were getting very sketchy. However, with the completion of the Fazbear project, there was a good chance Edwin could get them back in the green. And then Henry contacted Edwin, and after all the production and all the money spent, he suddenly wanted to swap out the project, change things very late in development, such as stepping away from the Springlock suits that he had Edwin create.
Test. Journal entry. I got the change order from Hen last night. None of this makes sense. I'm almost done. Why change it now? It would be so much easier to keep using the Springlocks. Just hire some teens to wear the suits like we always do.
Now, if there's one thing we learn from the games, it's that Springlock suits are dangerous, especially around water.
I'm worried about the new suit design. One of my costumers, Vic, nearly lost his hand today. All he did was spill a can of pop and the thing snapped shut like a bear trap. You're busy, but you can't rush these things. Please look into it.
But Edwin's reinforced Springlock suit designs were a lot safer than Henry's. While Henry's suits could be set off by a whole slew of things, including if you pressed on the wrong spot, Edwin's suits were shown to be capable of surviving long falls without harming the person inside. They're also significantly easier to climb in and out of. The only shared weakness being water. So why would Henry, of all times, now decide to stop the Springlocks? Well, don't assume Henry had a change of heart, because apparently these suits, his suits, were still being used in the 80s in a location that looks like Fredbear's Family Diner. So yeah, Henry might have decided to switch up the suits, but he actually didn't. He just stopped using Edwin's safer ones, or never started using them, and continued with his much more trigger-happy, shoddier ones. And on that train of thought, before I continue, this also confirms that Henry and Will weren't the only ones in the suits. They were also hiring teenagers to wear them. Just hire some teens like we always do. Which makes some sense since their company was a lot bigger. But also means that they were willingly subjecting people to these horrible suits instead of wearing them themselves like previously believed. This is backed up in Fnaf 4, actually. Now, it's possible this, let's be frank, ridiculous decision to suddenly switch up the order was an idea whispered by Will into Henry's ear. That William encouraged Henry to go with the cheaper option, in which case Henry is either entirely culpable, going along aware of the risks, or he was just Will's lapdog who barked when he got the command. Or perhaps Henry just had zero say in anything, but I don't think that's the case. Consider that Hen reached out, not Will. But let's be frank, the two's relationship was very close. Will could snap his fingers and Henry would stick his fingers in his ears and go along with it until it affected him. I'll get into later how this affects his character, though. But by the end of the day, the sudden switch in the order, one that Faz Int apparently didn't have to pay or give any leeway for, pretty much sunk all progress. It put the Manor from being in the red to being in the charbroiled black. There was no recovery from this, unless something happened fast. But William worked faster. It was then that William got a mole at the company. We don't know who specifically it was, but he promised to make them a manager at a location if he got them to get the contact info for the employees. And there just happens to be a man named Ralph working for Murray's. Ralph being the name of the phone guy, making him the most likely candidate. Will writes, or W.A. writes, "We're almost there. I need the rest of the Murray staff contact info. The sooner the better. You get that for me, and I can sweeten the deal. How would you like to manage one of the new franchise locations? W.A." Which he did. And with that information, William not only started to poach employees from Edwin, but he had them actively steal Edwin's designs as they walked out. So Edwin's growing paranoia...
Edwin, never forget, they're behind it. Don't trust them. Never tell them. They want to destroy you. Dad was right.
Totally justified. William was actively stealing his work, which he would then go on to use himself. This is why the staff bots resemble the Digityper, the Faz wrench resembles the Data Diver, the wet floor bots and the Cleanovac, and even why some of Murray's most popular characters, such as Jugman Monty, ended up in a Fazbear's establishment. William just pilfered everything, and once he did, Fazbear Entertainment could use it. Not that he had to do any of this anyways. As with the employees leaving and the deal falling through, Fazent would now own everything anyways. But that's not why he did it. All of this, was part of William's scheme. From the moment he walked into Murray's costume Manor and saw what was there was no plan to partner up. It was just a plan to take over the business. He gave Edwin a contract that would guarantee everything he had. He and Henry, I'm sure William was involved, changed the deal at the last hour. William removed employees from the equation and took up backups of his schematics for future use. Afton guaranteed Edwin's failure. He made absolutely sure that there was no way he could complete the job, and he could take everything he had. And the final nail in the coffin, the icing on the cake, is what Afton did next. He reached out to Edwin and told him software development and the entire MCM catalog. Now, this message isn't complete right here. I'm assuming the sentence says, we will be reclaiming all of the software development and the entire MCM catalog, something like that. We would love to keep you on as lead engineer. Although we now technically own the land, we would never touch the house your parents built. We feel this offer has been more than fair, considering how far behind you are. It's just too much for you to handle alone. We are waiting for your response. WA. He was offering him a job, not out of the kindness of his heart, but to milk him for everything he had, and then subtly put his house up for collateral. That's right, Afton effectively took ownership of Edwin's house and then held it over his head, intending to get him to buckle, so that he could continue to use him, now under his thumb, as an obedient worker. And then, you might have caught it, he did it very subtly there, he blamed Edwin for it. It's absolutely diabolical, and there was nothing Edwin could do. Well, I mean, there wasn't a chance to, because at some point around then, some point after he secluded himself in his house, perhaps he never even secluded himself in his house, but actually just vanished, Edwin was murdered by M2 in an explosion. Now, I'm sure that Afton was only partially pleased about this whenever he found out about this. Sure, Edwin couldn't fight the takeover anymore, but clearly he wanted to use him further. Edwin was a bright mind that could build something frightful and terrible. Afton had a use for that. And with him gone, he wouldn't be able to use that. But also with him gone, or perhaps while Afton still thought he was locked up in his house, he began his work in reclaiming Edwin's most prized creation, the Mimic.
I figured it out. There's a leak. Someone told them about M2. Well, they can't have it. Every copy has failed. I don't even know why it worked the first time. But it did. It's just not ready.
Fazbear Entertainment, and Willy himself, started sending technicians over to retrieve the Mimic schematics and the Mimic itself. Something that he's known to do. Recall when Afton sent his own son to retrieve Circus Baby out of Circus Baby's rentals. Technicians started heading in and promptly getting killed and stuffed into suits. It's no shock that Afton would want this murder machine for his own devices. He likely knew about Fiona, through his own snooping, and, considering his goal of consuming everything and rebuilding it in his own image, no doubt this mimic technology would be useful for him, both in creating murder machines and extending his own life. So, in a hilarious twist of fate, M2, a murderer, a serial killer, a crazed defective machine, is technically the good guy in keeping the data diver away from Afton. as is Fiona, though her goal is more inclined towards recreating David with it, not thinking of the aftermath of what would happen if she left the mimic in the mindset of David and alone in that house. Never even considered someone might just swoosh in and claim it for himself. But that aside, that doesn't mean that the guy we play as, Arnold, is the bad guy. He's just a helpless cog in the machine that Afton built, trapped in a lose-lose situation. He has to successfully complete his task or die. Or perhaps die anyway. No matter which ending is canon, the end is the same. Either Fiona or Mimic have the data diver, not Faz Int. In the secret ending, Mimic has been reprogrammed to believe it is David, and thus Arnold has succeeded in getting the data diver and now the subdued Mimic. And Fiona has already been handled. Regardless of which of these paths are followed up on, by Ruin we know that Fazbear Entertainment managed to get its hands on the Mimic and all of Edwin's stuff. But that doesn't exactly mean that the secret ending was the canon one. I think, honestly, it was a matter of time before Will found a way to trick the system. Heck, all he had to do was put on his Bonnie suit and go in himself, and he likely would have been able to get a long way. Especially if it was a Mimic that believed it was David. So in the end, no matter what side wins, Will comes out on top. Just like he always tends to do. Even when he loses, he finds a way. He's very resourceful. Speaking of which, let's talk about the current popular theory that Murray's house on the hill is Afton's house, that he claimed the house as his own, and that it's the Fnaf 4 house. Ignoring the fact that the house was on fire in the parachute ending, assuming it could be rebuilt. There are some similarities in the houses. The grandfather clock, the fact that it's on the hill, David's bedroom does resemble the Fnaf 4 one, with the closet and coloring, and the whole underground passage to the factory would line up with Afton's apparent perchance of having random buildings and passages built under houses, especially with his operation of, murder. But is Murray's house actually the Fnaf 4 house? Is David's bedroom the bedroom we play in Fnaf 4? No. And I say no because we don't play in a house or a bedroom in Fnaf 4. We play in Observation Room 2. Think about it. With the context added after Fnaf 4, we really don't know anything about the house, do we? So much of it is fake. Literally both in-game versions are labeled as observation rooms, and still, that doesn't even take into account how minigame interpretations might change over time. Edwin's house does resemble the details of the house, or the observation room in Fnaf 4, but there's no evidence to say if they are the one and the same, or if it's a callback element. That, too, is also very possible. Now, I do think there is a possibility that Circus Baby's rentals or the Pizzaplex or something was built onto the land where Murray's costume manor crumbled. A lot of it burned, but a lot of the skeleton likely remained, and with Faz Int owning the land, having it repurposed actually makes sense. Especially since they got a habit of building stuff on top of stuff. It's Freddy's all the way down. No turtles required. But with that covered, I think we need to take a look at this with another angle. A lot of folks, upon hearing the story about Edwin's relation with Fredbears, feel that this has reflected poorly on William and Henry, that it portrays them as a couple of hacks and thieves. But is that true? Well, in Will's case, no. We know William was a manipulative parasite who sucks up the life and use out of anyone he can. We know he's an astute businessman, ruthless and lacking any and all empathy, cold and calculating, and yet makes foolish decisions to serve his own interests, cutting corners despite it coming back to haunt him, not for the good of the company, but for himself. Think of it this way. Is it not totally in character for William to do all of what we went over? Down to him turning around and blaming Edwin, this is absolutely William Afton in his prime. He probably did even run down his son, and his lousy machinations were probably behind the Fall Fest fire. This is Afton we're talking about. If anything, I think this actually does good for William Afton's character, because after years of seeing old Willy as making more than a couple of stupid decisions, we see the cunning mind behind his most egregious of incidents. He plotted this whole thing out, went in and took over another company. And it goes to show us that it wasn't a Phasant versus Afton robotics situation. No. Afton was ingrained in the business. He was the driving force that led into the massive train wreck. And that answers my questions of how in the world Phasant became this horrendous. Here he is. And as for Henry, well, look, I know people think I don't like Henry because I'm critical of his actions as a character, but that's not the case. Specifically because his actions, while questionable, make sense. He's not a bad character. He's just not a squeaky clean martyr. And I think that's why I've been so harsh on him, is because there's a multifaceted character sitting there, and the books and games both hide him under the good guy mask. It's never really Henry himself, but more so what the story does with him and how it frames him. Well, that and the fact that Henry was kind of pushed into a lot of situations without the proper backing to make them a little more impactful. I just want to put that up front first. Clarify that I never considered Henry as squeaky clean, so you know where I'm coming from. But in reality, we never really knew a lot about Game Henry, save what he did in Pizzeria Simulator. However, what we see here can look concerning. We see Henry involved with Sabotage, but not enough to know if he's oblivious to it or in on it. Is Henry an active participant or just Will's patsy? I mean, imagine Henry standing aside with his back turned, letting William do all this horrible stuff without saying anything, standing up to him, or otherwise acknowledging it until it affects him. Now imagine him doing it again. Yeah, this is kind of in character for Henry. Needn't I remind you that by his own words in Pizzeria Simulator, he stood aside for years and let Will do whatever because he was struck by grief. Henry failed to act. This case is different, but similar. If you think about it, if you're willing to take Henry's words as the truth, then the fact of the matter is that either he stood aside and let it go on, or was oblivious for years to William's antics. Now, am I talking about the child murders or the overtaking of Edwin's company? Honestly, I think it covers both. I think the only possible slanderous thing is the implication that Henry built a poor quality Springlock to Edwin. And yeah, that... Henry's one claim to fame was his Springlock making abilities, so that is a bit of a hard pill to swallow. Unless we either say that Henry did attempt to stop using the Springlock suits and was overruled, or that his suits were worse because Will was pressuring him on time and materials. That could explain it, but at the end of the day, we don't know because, frankly, we don't really know anything about Henry except that he worked with William and William stabbed him in the back, a trait shared by most of William's friends. At the end of the day, though, Henry didn't make the deal, as we know. And he wasn't involved in the sabotage. It was all William. He caused the company to fail. But let me pull back because I should say that the fall of Edwin wasn't entirely on William's shoulders. It was largely on him, but there were faults to Edwin's company that Afton had no hand in. For starters, Edwin tended to get wrapped up and focused on various projects, making it hard to complete one at a time. There were numerous issues around the factory, such as the locking doors and failing elevators, that Edwin, in all of his genius, probably could have fixed, but didn't because he was always distracted with something else. And it's clear that there was a schism between him and the staff. Fiona was the voice of the workers who could get Edwin to listen, but Fiona, the other one, seemed more than content to just be working at Edwin's side. Well, that and she knew the risks of her being revealed to the public, but still, she didn't necessarily back up the employees. So once Fiona passed, the workers were more of an afterthought, such as when Edwin takes over the party of a worker turning 50, I don't remember her name and unfortunately I didn't save it, to host David's party instead when he could have just hosted David's party anywhere else, such as in his own house and just invited some workers there. He didn't even give an apology as far as I'm aware. It wasn't a, hey, I know that this is your big 50th, but do you mind if I use the break room for my kid? It was just a message sent down through the loop. Yeah, stay out of the party room. My kid's gonna be in there. These employee relation disasters led to William being more able to weasel his way in, because sure, some employees would have jumped ship likely, But if the employees did care about Edwin, they would have been less likely to all jump ship and probably wouldn't have been as eager to sell him out. And they wouldn't have jumped ship if the company wasn't floundering at all, which was due to Edwin's mismanagement. He kept moving on to more projects, more ambitious ones, and rushing through them. Things like ignoring customer complaints, leading to returns and loss of profits. Edwin was more than capable of fixing the problems, but whether it be pride or a lack of interest, or both, he didn't. The Fazbear project was the iceberg, but Edwin was the one who built the Titanic. But again, that doesn't detract from the fact that William Afton actively, clearly set out to sabotage his company, meant to steal it right from under him and force him into working for him. And considering Fazbear's practices, Edwin would probably be forced into even more unsavory working conditions. They expected Arnold to capture the Mimic and Diver after over 30 hours of work. We know they would have been clubbing Edwin over the head with his own house to keep him in line. And that's where we get to the Mimic and Fazbear Entertainment. I don't know if I'll make a proper follow-up video on the corporation since I can say most of what I'd say there here, but William Afton might have wanted to get the Mimic technology for immortality purposes, but he didn't need it, because he had Fazbear Entertainment. It's clear now that every one of their scummy business practices was put into effect by him. I don't care if there's a board, or partners, or what have you, there's no doubt in my mind that Will was spearheading the whole thing, and like how everything technologically advanced is just stolen from Edwin, Fazbear Entertainment and Afton are a couple of big frauds. Frauds who ruined a man's life and then led to the deaths of countless people just to steal his entire catalog. Afton didn't need a mimic. Fazbear Entertainment clearly is a mimic of Afton himself, still mulling along continuing his disturbed practices after all these years. William was a soul-sucking industrialist leech, and that's how he built the soul-sucking, bloodletting industry known as Fazbear Entertainment. And that's how he ruined Edwin's life and stole his house. Thank you for watching.